Hi guys. So as promised, I said I was going to talk about my medical stuff and give you a little bit of update on what's been happening in my life. Well, first and foremost, just a little update on my weight loss. It has stalled completely. I also got derailed from my diet. I had to go to Bombay for an engagement, and not mine, but with my cousins and all the drinking and the food, the Indian food, which you can't help, but you can't avoid it during a family thingy. I got derailed, and it's been really hard to get back into it. I'm also going to be traveling very soon. I'm going to be in London, and I know it's going to be hard for me to sort of diet and exercise at that point. I will be walking around a lot more than I do obviously in Delhi, but we'll see how it is. The biggest issue is that if my weight reaches a certain point and it doesn't move after that because of the hormones. So just to tell you part one of what happened. So I'm not sure if my family is going to be cool with me telling you guys this, but I feel like it might help some people out there who might be in a similar situation. So it would be nice to, share what I have been through and what I've learned. So last year in the summer, I decided to, look into my medical stuff. Now, my family has a history of hemophilia. For those of you that don't know what hemophilia is, it's a genetic disorder. It's a gene mutation, sort of like X-Men, not as cool, but it is a gene mutation. And it is hereditary. So how it works is the men have symptoms and the women are carriers. So my grandmother was a carrier. She passed it on to her sons, including my dad. My dad has symptoms, and then I would be a carrier. My brother would not have a symptom or be a carrier. So that's how it works. Because the woman passes it down, and my mother obviously didn't pass it down to my brother, so he's okay. The other way of doing it is obviously if my grandmother had daughters, they are again carriers, and their sons had it. Now, what is hemophilia? Hemophilia is basically a blood clotting disorder. I'm going to give it to you in layman's terms. Basically, it just means that when we get hurt, when we cut ourselves, when we hit against something and we have internal bleeding, that's when you form a bruise. With hemophilia, it means that your blood doesn't clot like normal people. So what that means is, obviously, there are different levels of how strong your mutation is or deficiency of this particular thing, which is usually factor VIII. But when you hit yourself by mistake, how many times a day do we bang ourselves, bang our knee, bang our elbow? All the time. And we end up with a bruise and we don't know how we got the bruise. But if you are hemophilic, usually, depending on how strong it is, your bruise will have internal bleeding, which won't stop. Or if you cut yourself deeply, it won't stop. If you have surgery or anything like that. The only way to make it stop is to inject yourself with a medicine called factor VIII, which is basically, helps you, with the clotting disorder. It's not always easy to get factor VIII everywhere. There are very few places that you can get factor VIII. And I know my dad has had issues when he's traveling abroad and he's hurt himself. And, there's been a lot of issues. Like, you have to always carry the medicine with you in case something goes wrong. Because sometimes, especially when you get older, you don't even know why you're having internal bleeding. Like I said, you might hit your knee or overexert yourself one day, and you might start having internal bleeding and you won't even know what it is. So this is something that's been in my family, and obviously, I knew I would have it because my dad is hemophilic and all his brothers are hemophilic and his sister's sons are all hemophilic. So, I had a feeling I would be a carrier, but you know how it is when you're younger, you don't really think about it. You're like, okay, we'll deal with it when it's time. Simple. And because I don't get any symptoms, it doesn't matter, right? So this is how it's been all my life. And nobody, and the thing is, when our parents were younger, there weren't any options then. They couldn't avoid getting hemophilia because it is genetic. You couldn't do anything. So you just have to make do with it. And yes, sometimes life is easy and sometimes life is very tough. I've got uncles and cousins who have had really bad time with hemophilia, where they had to, their they had to have knee replacement and things like that, because the joint gets, the more and more bleeding you have, the worse the muscle and the joint gets. So last summer I decided that it's important for me to figure out, A, if I'm 100% a carrier, and B, how could I avoid passing it to my kids if I was to have any, right? Now, there's something I have to, I have to confess that even though I'm not married yet, it wasn't like I don't ever want to get married. I think a lot of people think that if you aren't married till you're in your 30s, there's something that you don't want to get married, or you don't believe in marriage. And that's not the case. I believe you should get married when you fall in love and you want to spend the rest of your life with that person. That's the only reason you should get married. I don't believe to get married because it's the right time or because your family is putting pressure on you. I do not believe in arranged marriages because I think the whole concept is just strange. So, but for me, I've always wanted children. I think if anybody knows me, especially the bands I used to manage, I think they can vouch for this, that I think I was meant to be a mom, because I used to definitely baby them a lot and, take care of them like they were my children, honestly. So in that sense, I always knew I needed, I was meant to be a mom. But so I decided I wanted to find out how to avoid the hemophilia thing. So I went to a geneticist in Gangaram hospital in Delhi. She came recommended. In fact, I will probably put her details below. If you're based in India, you can check her out. So I went to her, and how it worked to get a genetic test to figure out if I am a carrier. For hemophilia, how it works is they have to actually first test the carrier in your family, and then sort of test your blood against theirs. So my dad's DNA had to be tested, which is actually a very expensive test. The thing is, the mutation is the same in my entire family. So if anybody in my family up till now had gotten themselves tested who was hemophilic, I could have just compared my blood to that. But apparently nobody did. I mean, this is how typical Indian families are when it comes to stuff like this, right? So that test of my dad's to figure out his DNA sequencing and what the issue was and blah, blah, blah was like 30,000 rupees. So that was very expensive. Then my blood had to be compared to that test, which was actually very cheap, which was just 5,000 compared to 30,000. That's pretty affordable. The whole test took about a month, and the results came out that I was 100% a carrier. Now, what does that mean? That means that if I was to have a daughter, she would not have any symptoms, but she would be a carrier, and she could pass it on to her son and he could have symptoms. But if I was to have a son, there is a 50% chance that my son will be hemophilic. And the reason is 50% is because it depends on how the genes, are taken when your baby is born, in the sense of if that particular gene came from my husband-to-be or the guy who's the baby daddy's side, then maybe there would be a chance. And it's strange because I have an aunt whose elder son has hemophilia, but the younger one doesn't. So it's one of those that there is always a little bit of chance that they may not have it, but the chances are very, very high that they will have it. I can tell you that from family history. Now, this was obviously a big blow. I mean, I knew at the back of my head, but, you don't really think about these things. You don't really think about what would happen if you were actually, passing this on to your child. And a lot of things started popping up in my head. Firstly, because of the healing work I do, the first thing came up in my mind was, look at the world. Look at how screwed up this world is. Do I really want to get a child in this world? And then the second thought was, oh my God, if I do want to get a child in this world, do I want that child to have, in a way, a disability? I mean, I'm not saying they won't have a fulfilled life, but they have to be extra careful, and they're going to have issues. And I know if you spoke to my dad or anybody else in my family, a lot of them will be like, oh, it's cool, we lived with it. Yes, you've lived with it, but you've had a lot of problems. And I wouldn't want my child to have any problems if I could help it, I mean, there's one thing if I didn't know, and there's one thing if there was no option or no cure or no whatever. But if you know beforehand that they can be hemophilic, and they would have to, be very careful, and they may have a disability all their life. They could get, they could start bleeding at any moment. I mean, it's carrying factor VIII everywhere, which needs to be refrigerated. And I mean, they could never get a tattoo. I mean, I love tattoos. If my kid wanted to get a tattoo and he was hemophilic, he could never get a tattoo. I mean, it's something so small, but these things you have to think about. If you have to get dental surgery, you have to think about how much blood there's going to be, how much bleeding there's going to be, things like that. So, I mean, that's pretty much the first part of what I found out. So, yeah, this is the story of the hemophilia, and I'll be back to tell you what else was going on.